Today I'd like to demonstrate how students and teachers can use the Zoom H6 Handy Recorder to easily and cleanly combine accompaniment tracks along with a vocal or instrumental performance picked up through the microphone. While the purpose of this tutorial has a very specific application in mind, and that is using it for music auditions which require accompaniment, the concepts here can be used in other ways in your classroom as well to provide a more polished, clean, and well-balanced mixdown of a recording. Using this method will allow you to adjust the audio of your vocalist or instrumentalist, as well as adjust the volume of the accompaniment track independently of one another. This is especially valuable when a performer has a performance where they are too faint because the level of the microphone was not appropriately set, or if the accompaniment track is too overpowering, making it difficult to hear the performance. Often we simply play the accompaniment track in the background to be picked up by the mic along with the performer. If levels are set inappropriately, there is no way to correct it in post-production. The only remedy is to accept the recording as is, or to try again. The method described in this tutorial will provide a more polished, clean, and studio sounding track. There is some post-production editing involved, but it should be relatively minimal and simple. While I'm confident you can make these adjustments in Pro Tools, Ableton, and Adobe Audition, I'm fairly certain you can make them as well in Audacity if that's simpler for you. Let's start by identifying the equipment you'll need. First, we will need the Zoom H6 Handy Recorder that your school received in 2018. I have my personal mobile device here, which will operate as the media player. At school, I would assume that this would be your laptop, though it can be any kind of media player that has a stereo line out or headphone jack. Sorry, iPhone users. The media player is what I will use to play the accompaniment track. Along with the Zoom H6 came a few cables. Today we will use the 3.5mm stereo TRS connector to dual male 1/4" jacks. This is an 1/8" mini stereo jack to 2 1/4" inserts. And as a quick side note, you can always tell the kind of cable you're operating with by counting the black lines on the connector. Stereo connectors have 2 lines, where mono connectors have a single line. In this case, we have stereo on one end with a single connector and 2 monos on the other, which is a left and a right, or whatever it is, depending on which one's red and which one's black. Some cables on this end have 3 lines. Sometimes that 3rd line is a microphone. Other times it's a video connector. And on this end you would have the video output or the microphone as well, in addition to 2 outputs or whatever is on the other end. I will use this cable to connect my media player to my Zoom H6. And just to avoid clutter, I think I will connect into 3 and 4. Over here we have a pair of good over-ear stereo headphones. Any kind of headphones would do as long as it has an 1/8" stereo mini jack. That's going to go here into the headphone out jack of the Zoom. For what it's worth, Zoom does have a line out here. Line out and headphone jacks are different in that the headphone jack has volume controls here, whereas line out is intended to go to an amplifier of some sort. The reason we are using headphones is so we don't have the audio get picked up by the microphone and create feedback. So the headphones on the student would allow the student to hear the accompaniment track, hear their voice, but not have feedback from the mic looping the accompaniment back through. If you as the teacher want to listen along as your student is singing or playing, you could use the Y connector adapter that came with the Zoom as well, and simply plug this into the output of the headphone jack of the Zoom and have your headphones here and your student's headphones here. Not necessary, but if you're wanting to be that close, you can. Alright, so now that we have everything connected, let's get started. I'll power up my Zoom. As you can see on my Zoom, I have a stereo microphone track here and 4 mono tracks, one for each of the inputs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. For really fancy applications, you might want to have control over each of these left and right, or each of these inputs. But for our purposes, for music auditions, we want simple. So we're just going to create a stereo pair, which results in a single file being output for the accompaniment, or whatever you're recording from another source, assuming it's stereo. So to create a stereo pair, all you do is press both inputs at the same time. So I'm going to press 3 and 4, and you'll see that the 3 and 4 mono inputs or mono tracks on the Zoom turned into a single stereo. All this does is have your left and right interleaved into a single file. And again, this is for simplicity's sake. And again, all you do to do that is press 1 and 2 together. That'll create a stereo track. If you want to undo that, press them together again, and you'll see it becomes 2 monos. Okay. Once you have created the stereo track, as I have here for 3 and 4, if you press 3, 3 and 4 will arm. If you press 4, 3 and 4 will disarm. If you press 4, 3 and 4 will arm, etc. Okay. Let's go ahead and arm all our tracks. So we're going to arm our microphone, and we've already got tracks 3 and 4 ready to go. I'm now going to prepare my accompaniment track. And you can probably hear that through the headphones. I'll let it go. Okay. What I really encourage you to do is to make sure you set your levels ahead of time to give yourself the best possible recording. So you're going to want to adjust your levels here. You're going to want to listen for the loudest part of the song and make sure that none of these spike. As you can see here, my fourth, I don't know if you can see that, but 4 is in the red. So I need to bring that down some. So I'm setting that to 4 on mine, maybe 3.5. And now I'm getting kind of even left and right. So you want to make sure you monitor that, be mindful of that, that you can not have clipping. Likewise, with your singer or instrumentalist, you want to make sure that their mic is not up in the red here, like this. So you want to make sure that you're adjusting this volume as necessary for what they're singing or playing. Obviously, vocalists will be a little bit, less present than, or you'll need to turn down the levels for that versus like a trumpet player or something. Additionally, I want to point out that you really want to have students pay attention to the project name, the folder, and the file. This is key for file management, especially if you have a large program. Now, you can change file names in the Zoom. It's just really complicated. You literally have to like scroll through, pick a letter, punch it in, scroll to the next letter, punch that in. So it's worse than texting on an old flip phone. So I'd rather manage that post-production in Windows or something like that. But I guess what I would recommend is having your students clearly remember, clearly notate what folder they were in, what file they were on when they were recording their takes. Anyhow, if you care to, see page 50 of the manual on how to rename projects. I would also encourage, when you're recording along like this, simply have them pause. If it's one student, that is. So if one student is recording and they're doing multiple takes, multiple elements, simply do the pause and unpause rather than record and stop. This will allow you to not have a bazillion files to work with. For those of you worried about your memory card running out of space, as long as you got the 64 gigabyte card that came with the package last year, you have plenty of space. Even with 2 gigabytes, you've got a lot of space as well. Another thing you might have students do is notate the time in which they recorded. Now this all depends on if you've set the time on here to match the actual time in your location. So setting the time can also help you when you're looking through files. If somehow you've lost one of your students' files or you just can't locate it, that happens, especially with the volume of files we're dealing with. Notating the time might help you to look at the timestamp on the file to identify it. I also want to highlight page 86 that you can decide how files are named on the Zoom. They default to Zoom 0001 all the way to Zoom 99999, which is sequentially named. This does nothing to tell you when it was recorded. It just says in sequence where was it recorded after the previous data. I would recommend changing this to date so you can have an idea of when things were recorded, so you can easily find things that are more recent, or if you have a sense of when something was recorded that you're seeking, this might be more informative than the default setting of Zoom sequential number. So you do that, the description on how to do that is on page 86 of the manual. Now I mentioned in another part of the video that I recommend changing the default naming convention from Zoom plus sequential number to date format. I hadn't done that when I recorded this, and I'm not going to go do that now just for the purposes of that. But here you can see I'm not practicing what I preach, but anyhow, it's beside the point. Here I just wanted to show you the tracks you'll see. The thing I recorded earlier that had the stereo left and right, that's the LR. And you can see track 3 and 4, that was from my phone. And here I did enable the backup recording, which I mentioned in another part of the video that I highly recommend you do as well. And this will preserve your recording at 12 decibels less than it was set to be recorded at. And for what it's worth, the backup is only of the microphone, not of any of the tracks, which is really what's most important, because the track you can duplicate. Unless, of course, the inputs were from a live performance, like from a piano or guitar, then you can't do it. Now let's posit that we've played our accompaniment track, we've listened to it, we've checked our levels, we've done our sample or test with the vocalist to make sure the mic is set appropriately. We're going to go ahead and record our track. So we'll hit play on the accompaniment track, have the headphones on the performer, hit record. You've got all your tracks armed, of course. Hit record, record that performance. You either pause or stop depending on what you're doing. Now you've got some dead space before or dead space after, or people talking before, or something that you don't want in the recording. How do you get rid of that? Well, you can do some trimming in the Zoom, but it's really inefficient compared to what else we have with Pro Tools, Ableton, Adobe Audition, Audacity. Another thing you might do with your file is to trim the beginnings and ends of that file. And you can do that here on page 58. It describes how to do that. Again, you can probably be a little bit more detailed if you're in a DAW like Ableton, Pro Tools, or Adobe Audition, Audacity, but here's a way to do it in the Zoom if you don't want to pull them into something like that. So at this point, once you've got your final track, I would actually take this, connect it to your computer, open the files from there, and do the trimming in a digital audio workstation like Ableton or, Pro Tools, that sort of thing. So depending on how you think about capturing your student's audition, there's several things that might help you out here. I'm going to present some ideas that might work for you and might not, depending on how you think about it. So let's assume you're the type of teacher that wants to record your students one element at a time. You might just do their choral #1 audition where they're singing the combined piece along with the accompaniment. And you're doing that in one take, and that's all you want for the moment. As we described in the video earlier, you would record the student performance through the microphone, and you would record at the same time through the inputs, 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on where you're connecting, the accompaniment track through there. Once you've finished recording that, you want to go back and listen to that and see how the mix was, because you want to make sure that your student wasn't too loud, too soft, that the accompaniment wasn't too loud, too soft. You can actually adjust those settings on the Zoom directly by going to page 46. If you're interested in doing the mixing on the Zoom, see page 46 of the manual. And page 46 demonstrates how you can mix a recording. You can adjust things like volume in 0.5 decibel increments. You can increase up to 12 decibels and go all the way down to 0. And just to be clear, in order to do this, you must be recording in the WAV format. Another thing I really recommend is recording in WAV 44.1 16-bit. You can always export that to an MP3 from the Zoom if you've done all the work there. Now we talked earlier about ensuring that you're in WAV. Page 83 of the manual describes how you can change the format of your recording. I think it defaults to WAV 44.1 16-bit. That's plenty. Just make sure on WAV and you'll be able to do the editing right on the Zoom. If you're set for MP3, it won't work. One of the features of the Zoom that you must employ, or I highly encourage you to, is to enable the backup recording. And again, this is only available if you are in the WAV format, so make sure you're not on MP3. Why this is valuable is because sometimes we set our microphones too loud or too sensitive, where the recording we get is distorted because the source was too close or just too loud for the level that it was set at. And that's tragic when it's a really great performance that you wanted to capture and archive. Now, one of the ways that Zoom provides a way to rectify this is that at the same time you're recording the source material at the level that you set on the device, it records the exact same thing proportionally reduced by 12 decibels. So it records the same thing 12 decibels less than the original settings on the device. This is super valuable, especially if you have a really good take from a kid who just happened to get too close to the mic and spiked it or did something that kind of ruined the recording. This backup gives you another option. And again, I'll reiterate, with 64 gigabytes of space, there's really not a problem by having all this backed up, unless of course you're using your Zoom for like all the time every day. So let's say you've mixed your project as described on page 46. You've got it where the vocalist or the instrumentalist is prominently heard and the backing track is not prominently heard and not overwhelming them. You can now mix it down and export it. So go to page 52 of the manual and you can see how to do that here. Now, if you're planning to do more stitching together, say you have one element here and you have like a vocalese or a scale that you want to add to it and other parts of the audition that you want to merge together later, I would still export as a wave. Now, if you somehow manage to get all the audition elements into one file and they're back to back to back and they're clean, at this point you could export it as an MP3, but I still would go with wave and then export it later. That's just my preference, but you can do what you want. So this is one way to do it on the Zoom. There are other ways to do this same thing by importing the track into Pro Tools or into Ableton and having your students record alongside it. Sometimes there's issues with latency. You could also use your Zoom as the audio interface where you're using the mic as an input in Pro Tools. I can maybe show that in another tutorial as an option. I hope this helps. As always, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to walk you through this via link or live if I'm in your location.